We are back, and I'm so excited to have on the show, long time coming, Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk, Krystal, Kyle, and friends. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, your posting game has kind of been getting me through, I would say, these past few weeks, because this might be the funniest tweet I've seen in quite a while. Nancy Mace went to barbecue for her birthday, and how many different kinds of beans is this? Kyle tweeted, "That's a lot of beans, you nasty ass bitch." And I saw another person saying, "Well, now we know why she's obsessed with bathrooms." So
that is so gross.
God, I don't want to be in a 6-foot radius of that lady right now. Holy moly.
I told Chris, I was like, man, because that was one of those tweets where I didn't think it just happened. Like, I saw it and that was my instant reaction and I just went with it. And afterwards,
flow state tweet.
That's exactly right. Krystal was like, man, you had a real moment of brilliance there, didn't you?
It really, honestly, that is, if you have a tombstone, there you go. You can just have that tweet basically superimposed on it.
It got big. People are making like graphics of me with like, how the motivational quotes with that.
Yeah. But Nancy Mace, truly, have you ever seen a thirstier politician in your life for attention?
Oh my God. It's so violent.
You read that story about how one of her staffers said she tried to get punched in the face on January 6th by one of the people. So for attention.
Right. And now she's saying, I was assaulted by some pro-trans person. And there's like 3 or 4 witnesses that was like, you got a handshake. What are you talking about?
Well, she thinks that just the mere presence of a trans woman in the bathroom means she's likely to be sexually assaulted, which, I don't know, perhaps a handshake for her is like what an assault would be for somebody else. But I don't know. Like, what do you think? I guess Nancy Mace is such a clown, but she is kind of representative of MAGA right now. Like, just headlines, substanceless, attention over everything else, and hoping that pays dividends for you in some way. And frankly, it's kind of working out for them, although I will say that Trumpism without Trump, I do think is going to be a failure given his kind of unique charisma and hold over the MAGA cult. But this is a bit of a rambling question. I guess, what's your sense of how MAGA is positioned right now?
Well, how would you distract from the fact that we now have the billionaires completely and utterly taking over our government, that Trump has appointed countless billionaires, countless Wall Street executives. Doge is like this big thing now that even Democrats are like, I agree with them on this point and this point. And it's like, this is the distraction. The distraction is, I'm going to talk about trans people 24/7 and pretend like trans people are hurting you and screwing you and ruining your life. And just focus on this. And don't look over here as we run out the back door with all the money. It's literally the oldest trick in the book. It's divide and conquer. And trans people are now a scapegoat in the same way that back in the day, it was gay people. People forget. There was a time not that long ago where the overwhelming majority of the country was against gay marriage, right? I believe it was in 2004, the Republicans ran on this idea of getting a constitutional amendment to define marriage as between man and a woman. And by the way, that was happening when? As the Iraq War was happening. So it's another divide and conquer. Hey, look over here, don't look over here. And the bottom line is, I'm now of the belief that you got to fight on both fronts. You got to put the focus where it should be, which is, hey, the billionaires are taking over the government, but also you have to defend these marginalized communities who are being scapegoated. They didn't do anything wrong. Who have trans people hurt? No, they're not hurting anybody.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with you on that front. And I guess we thought that you and I both thought Kamala Harris is going to win this election.
Yeah, I did.
I was pretty bullish on my electoral map. I know you were as well, but that was part of it was what you talk about here, which is that broadly on the issues, we saw in 2022 how the Republicans ran on anti-trans stuff. And it didn't work out for them. But in 2024, with Donald Trump being at the top of the ticket and the force of his personality, the fact that he is a charismatic figure, and the fact that he's anti-establishment and hated by both Democrats and Republicans, I think really benefited him. And people are just taking the wrong lessons about, it's time to throw trans people under the bus. No. Sted Herndon made this point to us when he came on our show. The part of the problem was that the Democrats didn't have a primary where they could have hashed these issues out and performed democracy for the public. It was really difficult for them to sell the notion that they were the protectors of democracy when a majority of Americans thought Biden was too old to run again. And he did so anyway. There wasn't really a period of time where the Democrats could have had a debate about these issues, which would have been the publicity that they needed so people even knew where they stood. And it was an example for folks to be like, okay, they're not responsive to what we're saying. Overall, we don't want this guy to run again. We don't think he can do the job. So I don't know, might as well be entertained as our government doesn't respond to us at all.
Yeah, what I would say is Trump proved that you could be the most divisive person in the entire country and win. He was just divisive along the incorrect lines. He told people, all of your problems are real, they're legitimate, you're angry, but the problem is the immigrants. The problem, it's the trans people. And he hammered that away over and over and over, and that was his narrative. And people are angry, they're pissed off, and they don't really know where to point their anger, right? And the problem with the Democrats, it was they didn't have a counter narrative to take on that narrative. The counter narrative has to be, they're wrong. Immigrants are not the problem. Trans people are not the problem. The problem, it's Elon Musk. It's the robber barons. It's the billionaires. It's the corporations who've bought our government, rigged our government to represent them, and never represent you. And so the fact that the Democrats were more technocratic and they're more status quo managers who call for decent policies, but it's like little tweaks around the edges, that just left the lane wide open for a demagogue like Trump to win. And he ended up winning by talking about Arnold Palmer's cock. He ended up winning by saying immigrants are eating cats and they're eating dogs. Like, for people to take away, oh, I think we should cave to the right on certain issues and maybe be more kind to the right on many issues. My takeaway is the exact opposite. You can be as unhinged, as arrogant, as divisive as you want to be, as long as you keep coming home to your narrative of the problem is the billionaires. The problems, it's the donor class. That's what we need to do.
I mean, the idea that you would be taking anything of substance out of this election in terms of like what Donald Trump ran on specifically is an entire misreading of the political moment. Because as you say, part of what gave me confidence, and maybe you as well, was the idea that his campaign was so undisciplined from a message perspective. And you had the through line of they're coming after me, they're trying to shoot me, and also immigrants are horrible, and Kamala Harris is a bitch that should get punched in the face. And those were the kinds of things where it's like, okay, I just don't necessarily see what I saw in 2016, where he at the very least was talking about how Bernie Sanders was right to call Hillary Clinton corrupt and co-opting that messaging, or the free trade, anti-free trade posture. He was at the very least speaking to that anger. And this time around, he was entirely incoherent, which is an even greater indictment on the Democratic Party branding. Not really for me, any specific candidate, but it's like, give people an enemy. They're angry. And the enemy is who you say. It's the wealthy, it's the elites who are, and we can talk about the Luigi Mangione shooting in a bit, but alleged. But that is like, that's that anger that they just completely didn't tap into. And it's clearly there. They should have.
Yeah. And none of them are coming to the correct lessons now, because you don't see this like massive uptick in anger and narrative driving. If anything, you see what we discussed before, which is like, oh, I don't know, maybe on immigrants we cave a little bit more, even though Kamala ran on a super strict border bill and said Trump is the one who tanked it. It's just, if anything, this election shattered everything about the way I understand politics, in the sense that the main takeaway is, as long as you're angry and you have a narrative, you can get away with almost anything at all. And that's what Trump did. And it's kind of sad how easy it is to convince people, no, seriously, the source of your problem, it's the immigrants. Like, oh, your wages are low and you don't have good health care and this and that. Well, maybe if we deport 20 million people, that'll be better off for you. I mean, that's functionally the argument of the right. And I'm now of the belief, don't give even an inch on that argument. Not an inch. You got to fight back on all fronts and make clear these are not the enemies.
Yeah, the Democrats have unfortunately not been doing that, though, because the only way that they hit the Republicans in that election was on hypocrisy, was on process, as opposed to the substance of the immigration point. It was like Donald Trump, he doesn't care about you. He wanted to kill this right-wing border bill that reinforces the Republican Party's framing on the issue of immigration. And what do you know? It was the same. In many ways, it does shatter our perception, but it's also the same story that we've been telling, I would say, since 2016, which is that if you try to be Republican light, people go with the real thing basically every time, unless there's a global pandemic or we're at the end of a really unpopular Iraq war and the economy is crashing.
Yeah, and if you think back to Bernie, he was able to spark a movement because he had a narrative. And even though he was like 1,000 years old and he's kind of like a humorless old guy, I mean, and I love Bernie, I mean that with love, but like just the fact that he had a narrative and he kept hammering away on it, he was able to go from like 2% in the polls to 48% in the polls in 2016. And it's like, wow. Now imagine if you have somebody with that narrative and with that anger, but you also sprinkle in the entertainment value and the humor. I mean, honestly, it should be easy to defeat these charlatans, but this is now he's 2 for 3 in elections, and that requires some soul searching.
The Democrats ceding the ground to him on this allowed him to paint immigration as a pro-worker narrative, which is
you're fighting on his grounds.
Exactly.
He framed the conversation, and you followed him down that path, as opposed to saying, "No, I reject your framing. Here's the reality. Why did you put so many Wall Street people in your administration last time and so many billionaires? Why are you doing it again this time? Like, why is your number one legislative accomplishment a massive tax cut for the rich, where 83% of the benefits went to them? You're not pro-worker. We lost 200,000 jobs. What are you talking about?" You have to totally reframe the conversation, and there's very few leaders who are willing and able to do that and know how to do that.
And Trump firing Lena Khan and basically replacing her with Andrew Ferguson, who, can we pull up this document that Punchbowl News obtained? We read this on the show the other day. I'm sure you've seen this, Kyle, where basically it shows how Andrew Ferguson, Trump's pick for the FTC, who previously worked as chief counsel to Mitch McConnell, by the way, says that, oh, yeah, we're going to go against the reverse Lena Khan's anti-business agenda, you can see there. And a lot of this is about wokeness and the radical left and DEI and all of that. But turns out, what do you know? J.D. Vance's lip service about loving Lena Khan was a lie, just like his lip service about loving the child tax credit, a vote that he never showed up for, was a lie. Like, they were grifting, and you know what? They're not being held accountable for it because in many ways, Trump doesn't have a full constituency outside of his cult. Like, he can almost do anything and get away with it. Yep. And that is an indictment on the opposition and their tactics.
Didn't J.D. Vance get like a 10% or a 0% on his AFL-CIO scorecard?
Pretty sure.
They say, oh yeah, he's a populist, but then you do a little bit of research and you're like, hold on, he said he was for the extended child tax credit, and he literally didn't even show up to vote for it when he could have. What are you talking about? You dig deeper in his record. Oh, turns out he's not for the PRO Act. Well, that's like the key dividing line of whether or not you're a populist, whether or not you're for the working class. And so Trump, same thing. You know, I keep bringing this up, but he outsourced 200,000 jobs when he was president after he ran as the anti-outsourcing guy. There's no substance to the idea that these people are populist or they're pro-worker or they're anti-establishment. And to your point, Lena Khan was like the main one here, where it was like, look, if he fires Lena Khan, okay, he was completely and utterly full of shit. And I don't know about you, but I haven't seen much of a MAGA backlash over Lena Khan being fired. I've seen absolute crickets. It's almost like they follow the cult leader wherever the cult leader wants to go, and they're not actually populist. They're not actually anti-establishment. They're not actually pro-worker.
That's why the idea that we can unite with the, quote, populist right, you would have to fight for the right things. That would require the populist right giving a crap about what about these kinds of things, right? Where, as you say, I just don't necessarily think that constituency exists. They're just MAGA, and there's no backlash on the substance. It's just that they love when Trump triggers the libs. The only thing that I can think of where they had a splinter was on the vaccines. And even
Right.
though Trump did Operation Warp Speed, they still don't hold him accountable for it. He's the anti-vax guy that created all these mRNA vaccines that are, I don't know, giving you all these health problems, apparently, they say.
Yeah, look, it's very simple. They don't mean it. They don't believe it. All of its posturing, all of its virtue signaling, because they've had countless instances where they could have stood up and said, "Sir, I disagree with this," and they haven't done it. And so, in 2016, I could understand the argument, and perhaps I was more sympathetic to the argument of like, look, he did say some anti-outsourcing stuff. Maybe he means it. Maybe it makes sense. Maybe there are minor areas where you could work with them or whatever. But it's no longer 2016. We already have Trump's first whole time in office to see how he's going to act. The best predictor of future action is past action. And across the board, he was a total con artist. Like he was George W. Bush on steroids. And so to think now that's going to be different, based on what? Based on what? How would that be? He's snuggled up to Elon Musk at the hip as Elon Musk is waging war against the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the NLRB. Like this is their agenda.
It's because people are tired of it. It's because it's branding. I really do think that. I think that in also like what Morning Joe did, going and kissing the ring.
Yep.
Like they're like, one, they're worried about their access. But I think even more broadly, what has been disconcerting is the despondency that I'm seeing in reaction from a lot of people where it's just like, maybe we need to take our medicine and accept this. And it's like, no, this is the opposite. This is when we should all be resisting and coming together. And I'm not seeing as much of that as was the case when he first got elected. But that also wasn't a strategic resistance in many ways. Like a lot of that was focused on Putin and stuff that ended up being pretty ridiculous. Yeah.
So MSNBC's ratings have basically tanked 50%. And there's a lot of MSNBC refugees. And guess what? They are fleeing to spaces like ours. We now have the MSNBC refugees, because now I look at the situation and I go, you need to quadruple the resistance from the last time. The idea that now we're supposed to take this guy seriously because we won the election. Guess what? Because he won the election. Guess what? He was still talking about Arnold Palmer's cock the whole time. He's still going to outsource more jobs. He's still going to do more war. Like, let's not pretend like this is anything different than what we know it is now.
And you brought up the war piece. Wall Street Journal reported this last night that he is weighing whether or not his administration should do airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, which is what Israel wants him to do. I'm reminded of Maureen Dowd's 2016 opinion piece in the New York Times called Donald the Dove, Hillary the Hawk. And to be fair, she got that second half correct. Definitely not the first part. If you could just talk, you've been on this for a while, the myth of Donald Trump as the anti-war candidate.
Well, first of all, he actually said this same thing on the campaign trail, and nobody talked about it. And it drove me crazy. He was having some interview, and he was like, yeah, I think Israel should attack Iran's nuclear sites. It's like, what? Like, he said it. This should have been the biggest story in the country. And I saw hardly any conversation around it. So basically, this is Trump saying, yeah, the thing I said before, I believe it now also. Just the other part of it is, how do people think this is going to unfold? If Israel attacks Iran's nuclear facilities, then Iran, of course, is going to fight back. And then, of course, we're going to see this movement. Hey, we need to back our ally Israel as they defend themselves against Iranian aggression. This is how it's going to be framed. And Trump, we know he took $100 million from Miriam Adelson, and there was a quid pro quo there, like you have to let us totally annex the West Bank. But the other part of that is, yeah, they want us to fight Israel's wars. That's what they want. And the thing that drives me crazy is anybody who actually cares and goes beyond just vibes, if you wanted to look into what is Trump's foreign policy, it's all out there right in front of us. When he was in office last time, he signed a pro-torture executive order. He pardoned Blackwater war criminals who partook in that Nisour Square massacre when they gunned down innocent civilians.
Which Hegseth lobbied for, by the way.
Correct. Hegseth was the reason that they got that pardon. And Trump was like, sure, I'll go right along with it. Trump's first military raid as president killed a young American girl. His very first foreign policy decision killed a young American girl. He hired John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel, all these insane neocon warmongers. He dropped the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan. Now he's talking about war with Mexico. And the reporting is that right now they're discussing how far exactly should we go? How big should the war be? Should we just do drone strikes and some maybe targeted airstrikes? Or Should we put some boots on the ground and go in there that way? These are the conversations that they're having. So the notion that this guy, that in any world he would be anti-war, it's an absolute joke. It's a catastrophic joke. And, from these same people, I find that they never call a spade in the other direction, too. Like, I remember when Biden actually pulled out of Afghanistan, nobody was defending him. I was like, hold on. There was like 70 of you just last week were saying this is one of the top issues is getting out of Afghanistan. Then Biden does it. And all of a sudden it's like, well, we're not even going to mention. I remember Tulsi Gabbard. She put that as like central to her personality. And then Biden pulls out and she didn't say a goddamn word about it. And it's like, they're all fraudulent. They're all hacks. I can't stand them. And it's time for people to wake up and realize that exactly how he was last time, it's going to be like that this time, except probably worse. Because now he has that added element of authoritarianism that he can get away with. There are no guardrails anymore where you have the Mark Millies or other people saying, sir, I'm sorry, you can't shoot protesters in the leg. We don't do that here. Sir, I'm sorry, you can't invoke the Insurrection Act. That's a bad idea. Now it's loyalist sycophants all around him and a Supreme Court that said, you have complete and utter immunity for anything that's even remotely official.
Right. Which is, by the way, and I'm reading a book right now called Homeland by Richard Beck, and it's about how how the war on terror and the Bush administration really led us to the moment that we're in, including the Trump administration, because that is really the, I think, apex of what the Bush administration was trying to do with the executive. What was the executive theory? Unitary executive theory, essentially, right? Which is just like, if the president does it, it means it's a legal action and there shouldn't be guardrails. Like, isn't that the final form of what they were trying to do under Bush with Cheney?
Yes, that's exactly right. And this is like part and parcel of the idea of Project 2025. The whole idea is we want unitary executive theory of power. We want Trump to be basically an emperor. And then we want all little loyalist sycophants around him. We want to absolutely destroy the parts of the government that are actually good, things like the Department of Education or the NLRB or the CFPB. And they want to handcuff the regulatory state so there is no regulatory state. Let big business get away with whatever the hell they want to get away with. And then let the robber barons loot the treasury. Let Elon Musk loot the treasury. Let Vivek Ramaswamy loot the treasury. Give away I'm sure you saw the article. What is it now? Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, like all these people are now going down to Mar-a-Lago, kissing the ring and giving Trump $1 million checks for his inauguration. Well, what do you guys think this is? This is obvious quid pro quo, complete bribery and corruption. Now they're opening up the door to keep the corporate welfare coming, the subsidies coming, the tax cuts coming, the government contracts coming. And all the while, what are they going to do? Turn around and cut grandma's Social Security check and cut Medicare and cut Medicaid to give the oligarchs and the robber barons even more money. It's really disgusting.
It really is. And in terms of the anti-war stuff, it's not discussed enough how Donald Trump's foreign policy led us to the current chaos that we're in. And this is not to absolve Biden of his complete complicity in genocide, but more so than complicity.
Lock him up.
Lock him up.
Lock them all up. I agree.
I mean, right. Like, we're consistent on this front. Biden is a war criminal. There should be an ICC warrant out for him. If we were to actually apply international law in any real way, we have seen over the past year and a half how obviously insincere that idea is. But like, the Abraham Accords started as a Trump policy. Biden continued it. But he also did more drone strikes than Obama did in 2 terms and removed the reporting requirements for that. The Abraham Accords of trying to normalize with Saudi Arabia and other Arab nations while not dealing with the Palestinian people whatsoever created a sense of desperation for Hamas, where then Biden's in office. Okay, they thought potentially maybe there could be a shift in policy. No, there isn't. He's continuing the same policy of let's not deal with the Palestinian issue. We can keep 3 million Palestinians in a ghetto, 2 million in an open air prison, and then bomb the hell out of them on occasion to mow the lawn. And it'll be fine because U.S. influence in the region is paramount. That's what the message was said to Hamas. And Trump started that. Trump began that process to where we are, where now he's going to come into office and likely just allow Israel to ethnically cleanse the entire West Bank because, as you mentioned, Miriam Adelson gave him $100 million.
Yeah, and also another thing nobody talks about is Trump ripped up the Iran agreement. This agreement was working. There were over a dozen times the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, went into Iran and they looked at their facilities and they said they're abiding by the rules and the regulations. They are not enriching to the point of getting a nuclear weapon. They're using this power for their power grid and for scientific research as they're allowed to do. And in return for that, all we did was ease sanctions on them and give them back their own money that we stole. Everything was working. Everything was hunky-dory. He comes in and rips it up. And then I always love when they're like, Iran is even closer to a nuclear weapon now. My goodness. And they're like, oh, man, we got to crack down even harder. Right. We got to do more sanction. And it's like, you do realize that you're the reason we are where we are. If you just kept that deal in place and abided by it, then there would be no problem at all.
Because that's not their intention, right, Kyle, though? It's to create a pretext for war, right?
That's exactly right. Because they're
insincere.
They want it. They keep pretending like it's somehow defensive. Right? No, this is aggressive. This is offensive. We've all seen that clip of General Wesley Clark saying, hey, here are the countries that the U.S. wants to overthrow. And oh, would you look at that? Libya was on the list. Syria was on the list. Iraq was on the list. Those are all gone now. And now we have, of course, Iran, which is up next.
Right.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.